Corla. Couldn't fall to River Millishaw. Tá sé riachtanach a chun se fatis ar an freisin. Mar go minic bunny te riala hoide. Bín rudí réasúnta ag a tús. Agus in sin tosíon na riachtan is i pá perimédal agus ní diontar ein idealú I de beg agus mór. Minister, I welcome this bill, but I have a concern about regulators. Unlike a lot of people in this House, I don't think that everything that's independent is necessarily good, because I often say the word independent, an independent this or that, who is it independent of? And what we really actually mean to say is it's independent of this House. Now, in terms of individual cases, I have no problem with that. But I do have problems when the House stands back and when the regulator across all of a sector starts acting in a way that's not in the public interest. And we've seen this with the water regulator, where the water regulator is now charging 20,000. 20,000. That's what Irish Water charges. 20,000 for 100 metres of pipe to one house. Now, that's unreasonable. But of course, nobody's going to pull the regulator up because we're going to be told the regulator is independent. So what I want to emphasise here, independence in the actual dealing with individual cases are no problem. In terms of the big policy issues, they shouldn't be running the state. We're elected to do that, and we should never cede that power. And therefore, I actually think that ultimately, in terms of the overall policy and the way it is working and reporting, I believe it is important that it's answerable to you, not to you personally, but if they're answerable to you, then they're answerable to us, because otherwise we can't get at what is happening. Now, the second thing is this. There are some very, very, very big, if I understand it, multinational approved housing bodies. And then you have some very, very small local housing bodies in a small parish fulfilling a local need. I live in such a parish where we have a cluster of 8 houses in a local approved housing body, and there's never any big issue. It's a voluntary committee in the truest sense of volunteerism. None of the people running the little scheme get any payment. And I think that one of the great mistakes the regulators make is they regulate those small entities at the same level of bureaucracy and of red tape that they regulate a multi-million-pound business. And I hope that point is taken on board and maybe considered and try and nail it down. It was a major consideration of mine and a major concern of mine when we were introducing the charities regulator, that the little small charity wouldn't be regulated by the big charity. I don't know if that has altogether worked, but it is a concern I have generally with regulation. Proportionality. We seem to have lost a sense of proportionality, a sense that the risk of an 8 or 10 or 15 house, one-off, approved housing body, and any damage they might do if they ran amok is a lot different from a multi-million-pound professional industry with professional management and their capacity to comply with unnecessary paper regulation might be great, but their ability to actually deal with the needs of people is absolutely first class. Now, the next point I'd just like to touch on here is a very interesting recent phenomenon in this country, and that is this game that lots of legal people and accountants are making a fortune over. And something I can never understand is that the European Union make regulations and Eurostat make regulations, and then all of the people in the European Union find out how do we get around these regulations. And there's a massive industry built up in make the regulation and now get around the regulation. Now, in this case, it is time we did get around the regulation in relation to Eurostat and get it off the balance sheet. But I can't, fail to say, is there something wrong with the world that all the countries in Europe actually have to unwind a European regulation? And why was it put in place in the first place if we all spend a lot of money paying experts to unwind it again by getting them off the balance sheet? But obviously, if you get it off the balance sheet, it allows us to build more houses. So, with that caveat and that, what I would call nonsense of the modern world, I'll move on. Can I say, Minister, we have a housing crisis, the like of which I have never seen in my life in politics. And every week, I have the finest of decent people coming into my office about housing, particularly in the cities, in the city. Person after person. Now, I always think that the term homelessness is a very unfortunate term, because most people associate homelessness with somebody sleeping on the streets. And it seems that type of homelessness, the more wealthy a society is, the more people that seem to sleep in the streets, and that's something that I think we need to examine, because it seems to me that in wealthy societies we also have great poverty living cheek by jowl. In other words, one of the problems of the modern so-called great economy is that the gap between rich and poor is widening all the time between the haves and the have-nots. And it's everybody for themselves. But there are also what I call the hidden homeless, i.e. the people who are technically homeless maybe are in B&Bs, maybe are staying with a family in an overcrowded situation, and are in all sorts of situations that are unstable, uncertain, and do not provide the most important thing, particularly where families are involved, and that is a family home. And why do I say they're invisible? Because it's not what most people imagine we're talking about when we're talking about homeless. It is totally tragic. And these are people who don't need massive social supports. All they need is accommodation permanent. That leads me, because we don't have that much time, unfortunately, to the next point I'd like to emphasise. I might be old-fashioned because I still believe that the stability of a society, if we're really looking to the future, is measured by family stability, and the thing that creates family stability is absolute permanent tenancy or ownership. And I have to say that I still believe that the model where the vast majority of families and people own their houses is far superior than any renting or letting system. And I think that we will see the fallout of the move away from that concept in the future. One of my concerns about approved housing bodies is that they are not allowed to sell the houses to the tenants. I know some people argue, and all these economists argue, but it's fine for an economist to argue because they're going to own their houses. Very handy, very neat. But reality is most people aspire to own their houses. And when they do get to own their houses, they tend to look after them very well, and any of us who've ever gone into the housing estates where there are houses that are purchased, you'll always have a good idea which houses were purchased. And as I said, I believe it's a social value in society that's well worth the price to allow for ownership of houses. And I don't go with the modern trend that says that that's old hat because somewhere else they do it different. Now, one question I've asked in the Dáil again and again at very regular intervals, and I don't know if you as Minister get a chance to look at the replies you give me. But I keep asking, when is the review of the 2016 incremental tenant purchase scheme going to be published, and when are you going to revise that scheme? Because as far as I'm concerned, it was designed to fail, and the numbers indicate it has failed in attracting many people to the scheme. Now, when you look at that scheme at the moment, the reality is that if I have a constituent in a council or a local authority house, and we say the house is valued net after deduction of whatever, €80,000, and they come in and say, I or a family member of mine can put the 80,000 down on the table cash, still under the scheme they can't get to buy the house. Now, whatever person dreamt of that one, and you know what the argument I'm given? The argument I'm given that these people who've been paying rent every week wouldn't be able to maintain the house, keep it painted and mend the roof if the roof got leaky or whatever. And that's if, even if, and I have had cases where they could have actually paid to buy the house. They're not allowed to do it. And as I said, the reasons given often are just, you know, they stretch incredulity that anybody seriously believes them. I don't believe that people should be borrowing money beyond their capacity. And therefore, if you said, irrespective of the source of your funding, as long as you're satisfied it will last into the future, and depending on the price of the house, that you could borrow up to a certain amount and otherwise you'd have to prove you had the resources to pay the balance, I'd say that's very rational. It would be on the same basis that anybody borrows money for a house or buys a house. So if you've got 100% of the cash, you just buy it. No question, no problem. If you've only got 30% of the cash of the net price, well then you have to prove how you're going to pay the 70%. But in a lot of cases, if they did borrow the money at 3%, the repayment would be less than the rent they were paying. And they still can't get to buy. And as I said, there's a great value in ownership. And I think that it's time that a decision was made in that, and that the Dáil got informed as to what that decision is. And I would hope that it would be a radical reform of that scheme to make it work, because it hasn't worked. As I said, housing is a nightmare. It is an utter nightmare. Now, dealing with the local authorities, dealing with approved housing bodies, I can't believe the bureaucracy involved. Putting an extension of a house over 120,000 or 125,000 or something, you have to go back to the department and get permission. Why do the department think that engineers who went to the same colleges as them, that administrators who went to the same colleges as they do, are so incompetent, and they're so competent? If you want to do anything with an improved housing body, I think it's 4 times you have to go back on the project. Local authorities, when they're doing bigger schemes, I think it's 4 times they have to go back. Now, we had that. We had that for years with water and sewage. The county council wanted to do water and sewage, and they kept having to go back to the department for permissions. Can you remember those days? No doubt you were on the local authority, and no doubt you were tearing your hair out. And you were saying, why aren't our officials given the money at the beginning of the year? They're audited at the end of the year by the auditor, and they'd have to account to the government for the gross spend, and they get on with the job. But no, they keep going back to the department at every step. But suddenly Irish Water gets set up. It's given a lob on the 1st of January, and it's told spend that money, and they don't just go back at all. Now, why is it you trust officials, many of whom came from the local authorities in Irish Water, and you didn't trust them when they were working for the local authority? And if the local authorities are that untrustworthy, and I'm talking about the staff, well then they should be abolished and somebody trustworthy put in their place. But I don't believe they're untrustworthy. I think it is just a part of the control freak syndrome that government departments have always had with local authorities that they never exercised with the semi-state bodies that they have set up. And you know the old saying, some people see things, say why, and others see things that never were and say why not. And I'm saying to you, why not? Just say, we'll give you the money at the beginning of the year. It's up to the council, and I mean the actual councillors, to make sure that it's looked after well, and it's up to the officials to make sure that the spend is according to the guidelines and answer to the auditor, just as any other body, and let them get on with it, because in my experience, if you did that, we would immediately speed up the building of houses in this country. Because a lot of the time, it's not actually a lack of money that's holding us up. It's this incessant bureaucracy that goes on and goes on and goes on. Minister, we have an unprecedented housing crisis. Certainly in the city of Galway, it's worse it's getting by the day. Because more people are moving in and there's more house formation in all the guises of singles up to families. But this particularly weighs heavily on families. Then we are building our private and public houses in the city. We have no affordable houses. We're totally short of private houses. So you can't get anything on HAP, and even those who want to buy a house are paying escalating prices. And we're not building any local authority, or very, very few local authority housing. And it's way behind the increase that has occurred in the last 10 years. And there are figures here that, when you look at nationally, just paint a very, very sad picture. Between 2004 and 2010, 7 years, 33,705 local authority houses were built. Between 11 and 17, 7,421 were built. Now you might say, well, we're building approved housing body houses, but when I looked at that, 10,542 were built between 2004 and 2010, and 4,809 were built between 2011 and 17. I find it impossible to understand how we find it so hard in this country to respond to crisis and to do anything anymore. And we need to look at the logjams, because, as I've said, in many cases, money is not the problem. And you've often assured us yourselves that the money is available. Well then, if the money is available, we have to look at what processes we have in place, including referral to the department, including planning processes and whatever, that are failing to deliver. And in the final minute and 30 seconds, I would just like to say this. Perfection is a very fine thing in life, but it's also the enemy of getting anything done in the real human world. And I can guarantee you that the people I meet every week, one after another, the people who ring me on the phone all the time, it will break your heart. The people, families with special disabilities who need a house rapidly with the downstairs facilities. They will settle for the job being done rather than eternal perfection that nothing will ever go wrong. Because if you were living in a hostel, if you were living in a B&B, I tell you, you'll be just saying, will you get on and give me a house or an apartment or whatever I need permanently that I can call home. Good morning.